We think we know how the Americas were settled. Ice Age hunters crossing Beringia, marching south through ice-free corridors, eventually fanning out across the continent. But what if the Gulf Coast, home to winding bayous, shell rings and estuary-rich deltas, wasn't just a stopping point but an ancient destination for unexpected travelers? What if the first people to fish, camp and bury their dead along these shores didn't come from inland at all? New ancient DNA is rewriting what we thought we knew. Before we start, I'm on a road to get 1,000 subscribers as a small channel. If you want to help me, please subscribe. Let's uncover what really happened on the prehistoric shores of the Gulf. The Gulf Coast stretches from the lush mangroves of southern Florida to the vast river mouths of Louisiana and the tropical deltas of eastern Mexico. It's a region teeming with marine life, freshwater swamps and protected bays, perfect for early human survival. Yet for decades it was considered marginal in the story of the first Americans. Most researchers focused on inland sites like Clovis and Folsom, assuming that early Paleo-Indians traveled down from the north and only reached the coast after settling the heartland. But there were always anomalies. Shell mounds that predated inland villages, mysterious burials on offshore islands, and tools unlike those found inland. Despite its rich resources, the Gulf Coast's early human past was underexplored, largely because its wetlands made excavation difficult. But today, with better tools and new discoveries, scientists are starting to see this region as a possible hotspot of early human migration, not a periphery, but a central player in the peopling of the Americas. The Gulf Coast presents a special challenge for ancient DNA research. Its hot, humid climate and acidic soils break down organic material quickly, especially fragile strands of DNA. Add to that frequent hurricanes, rising sea levels and erosion, and it's easy to see why many coastal burials were lost or degraded over time. But new technologies are changing the game. Scientists now use a method called hybridization capture to fish out DNA fragments from old bones and teeth. This process focuses on key genetic markers, known as SNPs, that are more likely to survive in difficult conditions. Dense bones from the inner ear, called petrous bones, also help preserve genetic material even in harsh climates. By recovering these fragments and comparing them to genetic databases, researchers can pinpoint where ancient individuals came from and how they relate to other populations. These breakthroughs have finally made it possible to study the Gulf Coast's earliest people through the lens of DNA, and what we're learning is surprising. For decades, archaeologists uncovered hints that the Gulf Coast was home to people far earlier than expected. Shell rings in places like Sapelo Island, Georgia, and the Gulf shores of Florida date back over 4,000 years. Some are even older, resembling structures found in parts of coastal South America. Underwater middens and early campsites in Louisiana's marshes suggest settlements that predate the rise of inland agriculture. In Mexico, coastal Veracruz and Tabasco yielded tools and remains that hint at a Clovis era or even pre-Clovis presence. Burial sites on islands and peninsulas contained not just bones, but fishhooks, turtle shells, and traces of marine diets, showing these people weren't just passing through, they were adapted to life on the sea. Yet until recently, no one could connect these remains to specific ancient populations. Without DNA, the question of who they were remained open. That's where genetic data has begun to fill in the missing pieces and reshape the entire story. When researchers sequenced DNA from ancient Gulf Coast remains, they expected to see clear links to inland Paleo-Indian populations, people thought to have migrated down from the north after crossing into North America, but that's not what they found. Some individuals, especially from Florida and southern Mexico, showed stronger genetic connections to ancient coastal populations from South America, particularly those tied to the Pacific and Amazonian regions. Others clustered closer to Caribbean and Pacific Rim groups rather than traditional North American lineages. These patterns emerged through principal components analysis, which visually maps genetic similarity. The findings suggest that at least some Gulf Coast inhabitants may have arrived via a coastal migration route, perhaps moving northward from South America or island hopping along the Caribbean. It's a radical departure from the old inland-only migration model. The Gulf, once thought of as a backdoor, may actually have been a key corridor for ancient mariners traveling with knowledge, culture, and families across the sea. The DNA points to two distinct waves of early human presence along the Gulf Coast. The first wave, dating to between 15,000 and 12,000 years ago, likely consisted of inland-adapted Paleo-Indian groups who moved southward as the glaciers receded. These people used Clovis-style tools and relied on big game hunting, but eventually began to adapt to coastal environments. Then a second wave arrived between 10,000 and 7,000 years ago. These people had different genetic roots, closer to South American and Pacific coastal populations, and seemed more specialized in maritime subsistence. They brought with them knowledge of fishing, shellfish harvesting, and perhaps even early seafaring. Instead of a single unified origin for Gulf Coast peoples, the evidence now suggests a convergence of cultures, one from the north through inland migration and another from the south along the sea. Their coexistence shaped the cultural mosaic of the region long before agriculture or complex chiefdoms began to rise inland. Despite overlapping territories, the two population waves along the Gulf Coast didn't fully blend. DNA from ancient remains shows limited admixture. Some individuals had ancestry from both groups, but many remained genetically distinct. This suggests that whilst they may have shared the landscape, they often lived in separate communities, followed different traditions, or spoke different languages. Archaeological evidence supports this too. Tool styles, food sources, and burial customs varied from site to site. It appears these groups coexisted for centuries, sometimes interacting but often maintaining their own identities. Their boundaries weren't always drawn in the sand, but they were clearly etched in the genome. The maternal and paternal lines tell even more of the story. Mitochondrial DNA from coastal individuals revealed haplogroups like C1b and the rare D4H3A, markers more commonly found amongst ancient populations of South America and along Pacific shores. In contrast, inland groups were dominated by haplogroups A2 and B2, typical of early North American migrants. The Y-DNA told a similar story, with distinct paternal lineages suggesting separate male ancestries for coastal and inland settlers. These genetic signatures suggest that the Gulf Coast wasn't populated by one single people, but by multiple ancestral streams, some arriving by foot, others perhaps by sea. These discoveries force us to rethink what the Gulf Coast represented in the story of early America. It wasn't just a boundary between inland tribes and the ocean. It was a dynamic zone of arrival, contact, and survival. For too long, the region was seen as a late stop on the Paleo-Indian migration trail, but the genetic data shows otherwise. The Gulf may have been a destination itself, drawing in maritime peoples from the south and mixing them with inland hunters and foragers. Its estuaries, islands, and sheltered bays would have made it ideal for early settlement, offering fish, shellfish, and fresh water in abundance. Even long before farming or cities, the Gulf Coast hosted diverse communities shaped by different histories. This new view repositions the region as one of the earliest cultural frontiers in the Americas, a place where paths crossed, lineages mixed, and ideas flowed from both land and sea. It wasn't a periphery, it was a beginning. There's still so much we don't know about the ancient peoples of the Gulf Coast. Most ancient DNA has come from just a few preserved sites, and countless others may lie beneath rising seas or buried in swampy sediments. Could underwater archaeology uncover older remains or coastal camps now lost to time? And how far did these early mariners travel? Were they part of larger networks linking the Caribbean, Mesoamerica, and even South America? More DNA sampling, especially from submerged shell rings and offshore islands, could help map ancient seafaring routes. The story isn't finished, it's just beginning to surface from the sediment. The Gulf Coast has always seemed like a quiet edge of ancient America, but now we know it was anything but. Ancient DNA reveals that the region was a crossroads, settled not just by inland hunters, but by coastal voyagers whose ancestors may have paddled north from the Amazon or island, hopped through the Caribbean. These discoveries don't just fill in a blank, they redraw the map. What stories might still be buried beneath the dunes and marshes? Let me know in the comments. Check out the Patreon for deeper dives, and if this sparked your curiosity, don't forget to like and subscribe.